Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Greden. I am the chair of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Michigan and the executive director of the University of Michigan Comprehensive Depression Center. And it's my privilege to just launch this morning's event and to make an introduction for someone who will assist us in welcoming you. This is a privilege for me in a special way because a number of years ago I was on the search committee looking for a new president, and we had the honor to select President Mary Sue Coleman. She has been with us now for a few years, and what we're doing this morning is providing an opportunity to have you meet her, those of you who are out of town, and to convey the message that these are university and college issues that cross all levels. So please join me in welcoming President Mary Sue Coleman.
Good morning. I want to extend special greetings to out-of-town guests and welcome everybody to the University of Michigan. This is the fourth year our university has hosted this conference, and I think the topic of responding to crisis has never been more timely. What a world our students live in today. For students who graduate in a few weeks, their college years have been marked by the start of the war in Iraq, the loss of the Columbia space crew, the devastating Indonesian tsunami, and Hurricane Katrina and its horrific aftermath. They graduate into a world threatened by flu pandemic. Because of instant communication, tragedy and loss are no longer local events. The internet, 24-hour news cycles, and cell phones make for an instantaneous world. Students may feel just as bereaved about a resident of the New Orleans Lower Ninth Ward as they do the loss of a roommate to suicide or illness. As a university, we have an obligation to care for our students, make them feel safe, and help them through the difficult times. The counselors in the room today know that today's students are a generation that more than ever is willing to ask for help and seek counseling. So we must be prepared to act. Following Hurricane Katrina, we made a point of reaching out to our students to let them know two things: how they could offer to help and how they could seek help themselves. They responded on both fronts. We have a second obligation as a university, and that is to conduct research that helps to explain how and why people respond to crises, and how to understand and explain anxiety and depression. This is critical because good mental health can truly be a life or death issue. Twice this semester, the Michigan campus has experienced the tragedy of a student suicide. Nothing is more sobering to a university president, and I'm committed to supporting our students in every way possible. This conference is important not only for its topic, but for the fact that it brings together people from so many different perspectives and areas of expertise. Collaboration is essential when addressing an issue as complex as depression, and I am pleased with the multidisciplinary approach you are taking as so evident in the conference agenda. Your work is tremendously significant. I thank you for your efforts to reach out to more students and better understand their needs and concerns. I regret I can't be with you because it looks like a tremendous program, but thank you so much for being here and for making this conference the success that it's been in past years. Thank you.
It's my brief challenge to just give you an overview of this theme and a little bit of background. I suppose this might be stress, trauma, crisis, loss 101 or something equivalent. But what I'd like to do first is to give my own welcome to all of the out-of-town guests and to thank the program committee who put this together. They are listed, and especially Trish Meyer and Lynn Shivers, who really have done all of the coordinating work behind the scenes, and Dean Janet Weiss, who is providing us the facility. The historical perspective I will comment on briefly. Why this topic? This is year 4 of this conference. And then I'd like to give you a brief overview of just the integrative, if you will, biology, life events, et cetera, that tie together these themes, and the importance for all of us to kind of move this into a framework of action and talking about coping responses and what can we do about it to be proactive, and then to just summarize the goals. In 2003, largely because of the realization of how important stress, depression, anxiety had become in the country's perspective and in the world's perspective, and when you started to look at data, the realization came out that most of these things began with their onsets in younger ages of life. 15 to 24 were peak ages of onset. Stresses are variables. What happens when you go off to college? You encounter all kinds of stresses. The impact of alcohol, sleep disturbances, drugs, etc., all were contributors. And we decided to start a conference. It led to a very nice national response. The first year we addressed the scope of the problem and best practices and just shared viewpoints from around the country. Wasn't a shock to learn that the scope of the problem was large. All campuses experienced the same things, and we learned from each other about what various places were doing, what worked, what seemingly wasn't working as well, and I think that helped. The second year we focused upon stress, sleep, and alcohol and how they contributed. That became a much more scientific conference. It was wonderful. We had 3 directors of NIH institutes, and we learned about, if you will, the neurobiology and the treatment responses that were specifically relevant. The third year, last year, we addressed what people in the first 2 years kept saying we should be doing, and that's to reduce stigma. How do we address this as a special facet? Frankly, I felt, based on last year, that the students and the faculty were the most powerful voices in this effort, and they took it all home. This year, the program committee decided we ought to address some of these bigger picture issues, as President Coleman was just describing for you, and you can easily infer why the themes of responding to crisis, disaster, and loss were selected. The events are overwhelming, as she was summarizing them. What I'd like to do is to give you something just to take with you. This is not a simple topic. This is not just events. There is a profound neurobiology that's been emerging over recent years. If you look at where one is in the framework of life experiences, we can talk about a Katrina, a fire, a rape, an assault, a series of robberies on campuses, almost anything. Those are affecting people. Those people have various genetic vulnerabilities. That has been the focus in recent decades, perhaps even centuries, in our thinking. One of the things that you're going to hear today is one of the international experts on the topic of, in addition to making us vulnerable, our genes, if you will, our underlying infrastructure, also provide resiliencies. They, in some cases, foster strengths and enable us to respond to crises, and it's an aspect that we must learn more about. Inevitably, these things come back to alter brain function. There are things that can be done. I'm being very simplistic in this diagram behind. There are coping responses, exercise, antidepressant treatments, support, sleep, good hygiene patterns in terms of what you do with sleep patterns if we are stressed. There are also precipitants, and these affect entire communities. The consequences sometimes are entities. This slide I'm just illustrating too. There are many others, but the theme of this conference has focused on depression and bipolar. And for those of you who have not heard this yet, the World Health Organization, looking at the 100 most important diseases in the world, and this fits with the United States as well, found that unipolar depression, clinical depression, ranks 4th in total population, 1st in women. If you take clinical depression and bipolar disorder or manic depression and put them together, these disorders are arguably the most disabling and burdensome disorders in the world. They are second in cost, financial cost, only to cardiovascular disorders. The net result is huge, and campuses face these. And when you go back home, you know that. We've now gotten to the point where these things can be witnessed. They can actually be looked at in terms of brain imaging. You can look at consequences of stress, of where are we with the various genetic underpinnings. We have so much to learn, but it is happening. In the meantime, our tools predominantly turn out to be those clinical and preventive skills that we have to work with. There's no magic ingredient that we now have to take us to the point where we can look at a diagram like a brain scan that you're seeing up above and say, oh, this is an intervention, this is a pill. So in a closing several minutes, crises, disasters, losses, stressors, they are stressors and they are unpredictable, sadly. When people tell me, well, the real thrust of things ought to be to avoid stress if you're vulnerable, I keep saying, that's magical. I wish I had that skill. My feeling is the real answer ought to be how does one cope and respond, and we need to do these as communities. They also are highly publicized. Sometimes that publication pattern is not so good, especially on college campuses. When headlines come screaming out about disasters, it actually makes those who are more vulnerable sometimes more eager to join into that. That's a tragedy. We, I think, at this stage are recognizing that there are many forms, and there are tragic accidents. You'll hear about the Texas A&M bonfire. You'll hear about the Seton Hall fire. You'll hear about Katrina, hurricanes and floods. And my whole point of all of this is they all impact people. This is a community that we live in this campus. You all go back home and live in yours. Some of those are affected individually. Some of them are affected as communities and families. And that includes not just the campus family, but their families back home. And what we wanted to do with this conference was to share, discuss, listen, learn, find out what's working in various other settings, to take lessons back home, teach, catalyze, and actually establish networks to have communication patterns that persist afterwards, in essence focusing upon what can campus community members do to help each other, and how can we mobilize our efforts for an entire national effort. The topics, I've already mentioned some of these, are in your brochure. I mean, you'll hear about fires and natural disasters and lessons learned from Oklahoma City. What I would like, and others, what I would like to suggest is that all of you broaden this. This is not the only focus, because in many situations, trauma, loss, crisis, stress turns out to be just the bad events that happen to individual students. You have something where an individual student is assaulted, and then it happens again. And believe me, the impact is greater than on those two people. That's an entire community thing. So let us broaden this perspective. We're using these as examples simply because we've learned from them. But with that, our goal, I think, is collectively to say, what can we do to mobilize responses? Prevention, I wish were possible. As I read the literature and understand, I think prevention is the ideal goal, but it's not something that we can say we're going to stop and make this never happen. So coping and response prevention, if you will, in the framework of preparing people for ending this and getting on with things and actually dealing with next ones are better goals. As Mary Sue mentioned, multidisciplinary teamwork, I believe, is essential for this effort. So thank all of you for contributing, for coming. There will be people drifting in and out of this session for the next day and a half, 2 days, and I would invite you to have a terrific 2 days, and we'll keep this going then. Thank you very much. And I now would like to add one housekeeping clue, and that is there will be some cards, I believe, that are being passed around and for questions. And for those of you who want to ask questions of the speakers, you can fill those out. There will be somebody who will collect them. There will also be ample opportunity for exchanges verbally, but this is just for the larger gatherings.